So good evening to you all, and welcome to this Faith in Earth seminar. To all of you who are present in this room, honorable and distinguished guests, youth, faith leaders, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I think I have covered you all right now, yes? And also to you who are joining us online, welcome to you too. We hope that you will be able to hear us just fine and follow this seminar. Our ambition with this seminar is just, as the title says, to give you a deep conversation on religious perspectives on the way forward for the healthy planet. My name is Esther Flores Sedman. I work at the Swedish Pentecostal Development Organization, PMU. And together with LM International, SMC-faith in development, and the Faith for Earth initiative within the UNEP, that is the United Nations Environment Program, we are arranging this side event. We see this global climate conference as a unique opportunity to accelerate the transition to sustainable societies. And we strongly believe that religious leaders and faith-based actors are vital for that transition to be just and swift. And we also believe that religious literacy is essential to everyone who works with social change. So, we will start by explaining what we mean with religious literacy. And here to do that is Reverend Petter Jakobsson, who is advisor on religion and development at SMC.
So why religious literacy? Religious actors and systems of beliefs are complex, dynamic, sometimes conservative, sometimes progressive, and they often follow their own ethical drumbeat, not always heard by the secular bystander. Sometimes we describe religion as an elephant in the room. It's there, it's big, it has effect on almost everything going on, but we do not talk about it. We might not even have a language to describe it. And we do not always have the boxes to check in our reporting or in our analysis. The world is religious. A vast majority of the world's population, more than 80%, define themselves as adherent of a religion. Religious beliefs influence how people think, act, and understand the world. Those beliefs are integrated into values, cultures, and social structures. Therefore, everyone needs religious literacy in this world. And by religious literacy, I do not mean knowledge of scripture or traditions or dogmatics, but the ability to understand how religion influences a society and its development. It refers to the ability to see and understand how religious beliefs, for better or worse, interact with other factors and agents in our lives. Religious literacy is essential to everyone who works with social change, regardless whether they themselves identify with a faith tradition. Religious literacy will guide people so they can understand, navigate, and act in a relevant way in a complex world. We describe religious literacy as a necessary ingredient in the 3 leadership dialogues of this conference. And religious literacy is at the core of the Interfaith statement that so many have worked on together, and we're presenting shortly. Religious actors can contribute with existential meaning, ethical thinking, comfort, and hope. But equally or more important, they are agents formulating the ethical narratives with potential to create behavioral change within large parts of the world's population. We somehow tend to place religious actors on the soft side of things, but faith is a hardcore capital, a narrative capital when it comes to changing the world. Religions change behavior. And on top of that, religious actors are extremely important development actors. Managing funds, owning land, running education, healthcare, and other social services. Religious actors are almost everywhere in the world involved in development of societies, particularly among poor and what is sometimes referred to as marginalized people. Religious actors are present, have gained trust, and carry knowledge of the situation. And in the end, the biggest contribution by religious organizations and bodies is way beyond what can be counted or evaluated. It is the experience of being one with something bigger, of hope and of love. Things dearly needed as we face a climate or environmental crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. This seminar builds on the Faith for Earth dialogue within the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP. And Dr. Iyad Abomogli, please come forward. Founder and director of the Faith for Earth initiative will now present and introduce us to this statement, the Stockholm +50 Interfaith statement, signed by approximately 200 signatories. 240. Faith-based organizations, representatives of indigenous cultures and wisdoms, religious leaders from all over the world. And you have been working with this, and you will explain now how this process has been.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Am I heard? Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this official side event, one of the few side events that have been approved by Stockholm +50, and this is by itself is an achievement, having the faith community this platform to be able to talk about the role of religions in environment and development. And I'm so happy to finally meet some of you who have only met through the screen, Zooms and Teams and what have you. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. I will build on the excellent introduction that Peter has mentioned on how faith organizations have been contributing to development in all of its areas. And I would say that the world has an agenda to get us to the future we want, which is Agenda 2030. We should not forget that this is an agenda that was developed by millions of people to solve these environmental, developmental, socioeconomic problems. However, the main essence of the agenda, it is the responsibility of everybody and all of the stakeholders. Looking at the stakeholders segment in implementing the Agenda 2030, we found out that faith organizations have been marginalized for the past few decades. And this is why in UNEP, we thought of teaming up with religious institutions, interfaith organizations, faith-specific organizations to accelerate the role of stakeholders in the implementation of the SDGs. Basically, because we have forgotten the fourth element of sustainable development, which is the cultural element. And religions bring the cultural component into the tripartite of environment, economy, and social development. So in 2017, we came up with a UN environment strategy for engaging with faith-based organizations. And with discussions with many of the faith leaders, we have come up with three goals. The first goal is why we are all here, which is dialogue and engagement at the policy level, and giving the faith voices of course, faith meaning religions, indigenous people, all people of faith, and value-based organizations. So engaging in policy dialogue is very important because we are bringing a different element into the equation of sustainability. We have been saying science and technology and all the policies do not work alone. They are not enough. So we need to introduce the spiritual and connections or interconnectedness between humans and their spiritual values and the environment. The second goal of the initiative is building on the second type of power. The first type we talked about, which is the convincing and convening powers. Religions being able to bring people together. The second power is their economic power. Faith organizations are the fourth largest economy on earth. They own assets in trillions of dollars. They own lands as much as 36 times of the size or area of the United Kingdom. So this is humongous. And they have a role not only to call for action, but to take action themselves. The third, which relates to religious literacy, is to make the scientific evidence available to religious leaders and the religious scriptures and understandings available to scientists and to policymakers. And this is why we have been publishing reports after reports, thematic papers, the book, the Faith for Earth book. I hope you have seen it. And it shows what are the essential connections between religions and the environment are. Basically, what we're saying is that values, ethics, morals, moral responsibility, spiritual connections have been missing from the equation of the development paradigm. The one that we have had so far, yes, have led to increase in GDP and to wealth of nations, but has not been translated into the prosperity of the people, and it was on the expense of the environment. So we are calling, and this is the call that I made this afternoon with the United Nations University on alternative paradigms, how to bring the values and ethics and spiritual connections into the equation of growth. Growth has to account for the natural capital as well as the spiritual capital of the people.
Thank you, Iyad. And if you want to download the Interfaith statement, you can just scan the code for it on the screen. Iyad, thank you for guiding us through this process. In the statement, the ones signing it, they call for action from governments, from UN entities, from civil society, from others. And they also commit themselves to act. And several of the people who have signed are here in the room. So how will they be held accountable? Because it's easy to sign something, right?
Thank you, Esther. And this is exactly the point. We have signed an interfaith statement during UNEA 5.2, which was a historic statement, also read at the plenary of the UN Environment Assembly, which is the highest level global authority on environment. We have signed a statement to COP26 with 42 faith leaders at the highest level. And we have signed today 240 people, or I think 200 organizations have signed the interfaith statement to Stockholm plus 50. But then what? Yeah. The problem is that we are making statements and calling people to action, and we commit ourselves as interfaith community to take action. But there is no accountability mechanism. What is needed to establish is to establish a body that is non-biased, that can bring people together, people of faith, organizations, and so on, and institutionalize our connection or our policy or role in policy making. And this is why UNEP is launching the Faith for Earth Coalition, which will be composed of 4 important councils. The first council is the Council of Eminent Faith Leaders. You know, those people at the level of Pope Francis, Imam al-Azhar, the head of Buddhists, and so on and so forth. So this eminent council will have a regular, frequent meetings to take stock of what has been committed and look internally to their organizations. What are we doing? And then we will have, results-based indicators and follow up on the commitments that have been made. The second council is the Council of Youth. They are the dynamo, the motor for change. And we have seen that young people are good activists in terms of environmental sustainability and so on. But also we would want to bring the ethical component and religious and spiritual connection of young people, because they will be the popes of the future, the imams of the future, and so on. So we want them to have the religious literacy that is needed. The third council is everybody is talking about science and how scientific evidence is necessary to achieve the goals. But science has somehow been far away from religious and spiritual way of thinking and providing solutions. So we want to bring those two powers, the power of science and power of religions, together. So we are launching the Religion Science Consortium. And the fourth council is the Council of CEOs of faith-based organizations, where actions happen on the ground, where they go to countries and local communities and provide assistance and support. However, this support has been, in providing poverty reduction, and providing disaster relief and support. We want all of that to be sustainably built and contribute to sustainable development and, of course, achieving the SDGs.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Give him an applause. Okay, so we are asking the decision and policy makers to become more religious literate. And we are demanding a seat at the table for faith actors, as we think that we are a vital part of any society, for the sake of a more holistic development paradigm, where the most vulnerable has to be at the center of this table, of any development discussion, so that their voices are heard and that their perspectives are prioritized. And therefore, we will now listen to two of our partners from Kenya. First to speak is the Country Director of International Aid Services Kenya, Mary Githiomi, and she will be followed by Festus Mukoya, who is the Head of Development Programs at the Free Pentecostal Fellowship in Kenya. Please.
Thank you. And distinguished guests, both in person and online, thank you for participating in this event. We really appreciate. Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful that you could come. My name is Mary Githiomi. I've been introduced, and I am the Country Director, International Aid Services Kenya. As you can see, my flag for Kenya. I am proud of my country. Oh, thank you. I also, if you allow me, recognize our CS environment, Your Excellency, Mr. Tobiko. Thank you very much for coming to the event. You're most welcome, and we feel encouraged that you could come to this event. Thank you, SMC and PMU, for organizing this event. And I bring the voices from the ground. We call it voices from the front line. And I just want to give an example in a few minutes of how the faith actors in Kenya have been able to influence sustainable development and resilience. We have one project that is funded by SMC in Sweden. And when we landed in the community, we met one pastor, Reverend Karango. And when he spoke to the donors, and he said about the plight of his community, we were able to introduce resilience And that project has been one of the most successful projects when it comes to our projects in IS Kenya. It's also successful and actually recognized by the government. And when NDMA, our drought agency, they have recognized the work that we are doing. So Reverend Karango was able to speak to the donors, and we've been able to have a resilience project that is successful. Now, local faith leaders, they are respected. Where I come from, when the pastor or the imam speaks, or the sheikh, it's the gospel of truth. So therefore, the faith actors, if you don't go through the faith actors, even the community will not hear you. But try going through a pastor, through an imam, they will listen because they are respected. In the counties where we work in Kenya, we have pastors' network. So when we are doing training, especially for advocacy, so that they can be empowered, then the congregation will come to them. You can imagine of a sheikh. Sheikh doesn't have to go and look for people in the village. They come to the mosque. The same case to churches. They come to the church to listen. So therefore, when we empower our faith leaders, then they are able to speak with authority and with empowerment. And because they are respected, they are recognized also by the government. Today, if I want to apply for one of the documents of the government, like a passport, if a faith leader, be it a sheikh, an imam, or a pastor, it's recognized, and it will be approved by the government because that faith leader is recognized. Their voice is heard, and when it is heard, then the people, the community will feel they are represented. Ladies and gentlemen, when we sit with the communities, especially when it comes to sustainable development and resilience, if we invite the faith actors, we sit on a round table, most of the times under a tree, and the leaders are there, the communities will come. Because the communities will ask, okay, is my faith leader here, is my imam here, my pastor here? But if they have been invited by the chief or the pastors and the imams, they will come. I also would like to say that when we make decisions, as an organization, we involve the communities. We bring the views from the communities. So when we are doing the proposals, we make sure that their ideas are the ones that are appearing in our proposals. So if you don't involve their leaders, then they will not be able to contribute. I would like to say, we recently in 2021 started implementing a project where I live. I live in Kajiado, like my CS, one of the counties in Kenya, and there was one of the farthest wards called Mosiro ward. And we wanted to distribute water containers that actually use the sun. We have a lot of sun in Kenya. It's not like Sweden, we are freezing. We have a lot of sun in Kenya, so in these containers called Sulvaten, you just put them under the sun and they purify the water. I think, Mr. Ayad, we've discussed about it. When we landed in that county, I traveled by road for 5 hours in the same county. So when we arrived, we were actually received by a pastor. When we started distributing these containers, the pastor is the one who welcomed us because we were new in that county. So what happened, when we were able to explain to the pastor how the container works, so when the community come, then they are able to understand because then they listen to their leader, who is a faith actor. I would like to say that when it comes to sustainable development and resilience, I have one parting shot. Nothing for us without us. Nothing for us without us. So involve us as faith actors, involve us as communities, and the projects shall succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so excited to be together with you. And I'm just going to give you a few evidence-based reasons why faith is the hope for sustainable environment. from the field, sharing experiences from Kenya. Faith is paramount, and our argument is that it must be brought on the table. We must be, as faith actors, be part of the decision-making process. And the reason is that, as it has already been argued, we bring ethics in environmental management. And I want to bring evidence-based reasons for that. Number one is that as a church in Kenya, emphasizing actions through faith, it has sanctioned self-responsibility in Narok County. We are working with the county government as a church to deal with solid waste disposal issues. And Narok is very strategic. For some of you who are aware, it is the home of the Masai Mara, and you are welcome. It's very paramount that we conserve and we have clean water running through the rivers within Narok to ensure proper conservation. And so we are, through action, faith through action, we have mobilized pastors and religious leaders to be part of the agenda for waste disposal in Narok. Number two is that faith helps to prioritize what is at stake. And through this, in Turkana County, where we are faced with the challenge of desertification, women who used to sell charcoal, now they are championing against the practice. Instead, they are working towards alternative livelihoods. A powerful thing that we have the law, as our Honorable CS is here is aware, we have an excellent law, and the government is very serious on issues of charcoal burning. But through faith, they are looking at what is at stake. The women themselves came to their senses through the message of hope and said, no, what we are doing is not right. And they started horticultural production instead of burning charcoal. Three, because of faith drives self-accountability. As a church, together with faith actors in Soin, Nyakach area, the border between Kisumu and Kericho, the faith actors are championing the rehabilitation of dilapidated land management practices. They are now using sustainable measures as a way to teach others on the best way to manage the environment. And they are mobilizing themselves, even planting trees in their churches and helping to prepare traditional seeds to restore trees in that area because of taking it as a self-accountability issue in their own areas. And because of this, as a church, we have seen that it is powerful to have pastors or faith leaders take lead in environmental management. We have incorporated or included theology and environment in our theological colleges to teach our pastors the importance of environmental literacy to our faith. And that is where it is very, very important. Finally, I want to argue that we really need faith leaders on the decision-making table because faith brings unconditional sharing and caring. We have seen that through the desire to share the challenge, the successes that we have, this has stimulated the networks of the self-willing, those who want to work together, those who want to work in collaboration to save nature. We have come together, and that is why Kenya for Resilience was born, to which I am the secretary. We gave birth to Kenya for Resilience because we are faith organizations focused on saving our environment. We are together because we believe that we can share, and we come together through science cafes where we share the best practices to be able to promote this. And therefore, in conclusion, I agree with our brother Iadi and the rest of the speakers who have said that faith actors should not be seen like NGOs, the way we are being lumped together like non-state actors. No, we stand alone. we have the assets that can be able to save nature. Thank you.
So we will now move on to the last part of this seminar, which will be a dialogue. So please, the two speakers that are here in the room, if you step forward. Rabbi Jonathan Neril, founder and director of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development based in Jerusalem. Please come up. And Andreas Holmberg, Bishop of the Diocese of Stockholm, Church of Sweden. You may take a seat if you want to. And then we have two speakers joining us online, and that is from Birmingham. We have Shaheen Ashraf, Head of Global Advocacy from Islamic Relief Worldwide. She's also the interim chair of ICVA, which is an international council of voluntary agencies based in Geneva that assembles 148 humanitarian organizations. And from New York, we have Karena Gore, who is lawyer, educator, activist, and the founder and director of the Center for Earth Ethics at the Union Theological Seminary. Welcome to you all. I hope that you will be able to hear us fine. Do you hear us, Karena and Shaheen? You do? Perfect. So I will start by asking you a question that I want you to answer, all of you. Let's assume now that the decision and policymakers become religious literate so that they understand the influence and the potential that you have to change behaviors within all your communities, so that they give you this seat at the table that you are demanding. What then would you bring to that table? What would you contribute to? And I will start giving the words to the ladies. So Shaheen, if you would start, and then Karena, please.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see everyone, and sorry I couldn't be there in person. So I've just come back from a mission in Afghanistan, and what I did want to share with you is the difficulty that has caused in firstly trying to find the table, and then separately looking for a seat. And so this question is very timely, a very timely question. And in answer to your question, I think, faith-based organizations have a really amazing vantage point, particularly as one as Islamic Relief. As long as we remain true to our humanitarian principles, I think we will find one of the things that I would bring to the table is integrating authentic, indigenous, local methods of intervention, particularly where the local faith is deep-rooted in the knowledge of processes, for example. And I say that specifically because, we're working on a project in Indonesia where we're doing gender and adaptation, and that gender narrative within the adaptation narrative is actually what is driving some of the local level policy changes around women being part of that table. And secondly, you gave the question to women. So, of course, one of the other things I would say is women should be at the table. And I feel that often when we talk about religious literacy, and we are often excluded from the debate itself. So for me, I would offer the people at the table of understanding what that transformation and an authentic journey looks like of working with women of faith, specifically from women within our local communities, our local governments, and our customary spaces, to strengthen some of the, what I would say, some of the resolution processes around climate change, particularly around preparing community level disaster risk stuff, particularly around development challenges, in order to ensure that our local communities are on the map within these processes.
Thank you, Shaheen. Karena, please.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be a part of this group and want to thank those who have convened it. Having as your premises a seat at the table, I would bring first and foremost respect for local cultures that are in deep relationship with their local ecosystems. So some use the word biocultural heritage for this, and it almost always has a spiritual dimension to it, which is why faith communities are suited to carry it and express it. This biocultural heritage, these ties between human and nature in place, cannot be measured by money, and they often go disregarded and disrespected. And this even happens in the name of sustainable development. And that is because the current development model wrongly equates well-being with conventional metrics of economic growth, even when that so-called growth does not benefit local peoples, and even when it promotes extraction from their land and produces pollution and waste that actually harms them. So Center for Earth Ethics has been conducting consultations with communities all over the world, and we've seen the same pattern, whether in my country, the United States of America, in St. James Parish, Louisiana, or in India by the river Yamuna, or in indigenous territories in Amazonia and around the world. We can change this pattern and turn it around. And I want to just mention 3 roles faith communities play that are unique and powerful. One is prophetic, one is pastoral, and one is practical. So prophetic, telling the truth. Again, with that seat at the table, we must be unflinching in telling the truth, especially about the climate emergency. There's lots of misinformation and a tendency to shy away from the harsh realities. And so we must tell the truth to those who have power, and also to the relatively powerless in our own communities who can build their own voice and demand some change. We know that poor and marginalized people and all non-human life and future generations are those who are hurt first and worst by this, and it is coming for the health of the whole. We know that ecocide is real. We must name it and we must outlaw it. And in pastoral, we can guide and counsel communities. We know we can use these tools of sacred texts and teachings and ritual and ceremony to bring people together. And we must do this now more than ever. And finally, with practical, we can green buildings, and we can divest from harmful monies invested and also harmful alliances with power. And just 2 more things, and I'll give my time, end my time. Education, using the spaces we have now already to teach about ecology, to teach about biodiversity and climate, and to, in some cases, correct mistakes that faith communities such as the one I come from have made in not understanding and being in relationship with local cultures, particularly indigenous cultures. There's so much we can do with that seat at the table, and thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. So we'll go to you 2 then. Rabbi, will you start? Or,
Sure.
Yeah.
The ecological crisis is a spiritual crisis. It's not just about the birds and the bees, the trees and the toads. It's about the human being and how we live as spiritual beings in a physical reality. So what does faith leadership look like if it truly has a seat at the table? I think a key role for faith communities is to reframe the situation that we're in and to reframe the problem. The way that we understand the problem affects how we understand the solution. Climate change, biodiversity loss, acidification of the ocean, plastic pollution, those are all symptoms of a problem. The deeper problems are apathy, greed, arrogance, short-term thinking, and seeking our fulfillment of pleasure in the physical. The solutions are not only about electric vehicles, renewable energy, but they're also about changing our operating system of humanity to one that seeks humility, long-term thinking, care for other creatures, care for other people. Those are the spiritual solutions, and scientists can't deliver those solutions. Business people can't deliver them, and politicians can't deliver them. Only the religious communities can deliver on that. Now, one of the challenges that we're facing is that the ecological crisis is also a crisis of religion, because most clergy in the world, unfortunately, rarely preach or teach about the ecological crisis. It's an interfaith collaboration. It's across religions. And so one of the challenges is, how do we rewire religion so that seminaries train clergy to teach and preach on this topic? How do current clergy, the millions of current clergy in the world who have gone through a theological education program without focusing on religion and ecology? How do they have professional development so that they can preach and teach on this on a frequent basis? And that relates to what Karena was saying about this prophetic aspect. And I envision sustainable development as spiritual development. If sustainable development is only about 8 billion people having a high material standard of living, it's not going to work. It would be pie in the sky. And so rather it's about education and engaging religious communities in this.
Thank you. Andreas.
Well, so much good things have been said already, especially by Festus and Mary, your empirical evidence from Kenya, from the floor, yeah, like you said. I'd like to mention two things, and the first thing I think echoes with what Iyad said. I think that the current discussion at the table is too focused on the three sort of main aspects of sustainability: economic, sociological, and ecological. And so what we bring to the table is I call spiritual sustainability, or you call it cultural sustainability, or existential resilience, you may also call it. Because at the moment, I think the focus is too much on new technologies, on science, on socio-economic factors, on statistics, on new saddening scenarios, what is to come. And those things are all very, very important, but there's something lacking, because we're not just statistics or biology, we're more than socio-economic beings. We are spiritual beings. We have souls. And there's so much more that drives us besides all those things, and that motivates us and that gets us ticking and moving as humans and as humanity. And so at the table we need to speak about those things, about spiritual sustainability. And the second thing, which is really, I think, a piece of spiritual sustainability, is our capacity to tell stories. We have, in our faith traditions, in our different traditions, we have hundreds and hundreds of years of experience, even thousands of years of experience of telling stories, of painting visions, what a good life is, what it means to have a flourishing community. And I think, at least in the richer parts of the world, and certainly in Sweden, where I live and work, we are in desperate need of new stories, of new visions, of what society could look like, what we want it to look like. We really need those to discover new stories, or to rediscover old stories, to get us moving into a more just and sustainable society. Now, technology and biology and sociology, etc., economy, they can't deliver that. But theology can, faith traditions can, so we need the stories.
Okay, so thank you. So being most part of the world religious, we heard that, 80+%. And I hear all this potential, all this power and action just waiting to be unleashed. Why hasn't it already? Aren't you preaching this to your congregations or your followers, or aren't they listening, or is it happening but the media is not covering it, so it doesn't get the attention? Or what do you say? Are we preaching it to? I think when we spoke that you said that it's not preached enough.
Yeah, there is a battle to be fought within religion. And there is a battle being fought within religion between those who seek to maintain the business as usual approach and to maintain religion as it is, and to maintain an alliance between religion and materialism, and between religion and fossil fuels. There are many religious institutions that operate oil wells on their lands across religions. And between that perspective and between those who say we need to transition to what Pope Francis calls an ecological conversion, to a religion that is responsive to the world we live in today. I wrote an ecological commentary on the Hebrew Bible, we call it Eco Bible, And someone asked me yesterday here in Stockholm, what would it mean for the Bible to speak to hearts and minds today? A lot of young people today. Tomorrow there's a climate strike that thousands of young people will participate in. Many young people are more committed to ecology than they are to theology. And so to continue to preach a theology that is bereft of an ecological perspective is to ignore the hearts and minds of many young people today. So it's not just about ecology, it's also about renewing religion and having a religion that can speak to the 21st century.
Okay, so Andreas, do you agree that it's not being preached?
Yeah, we spoke about that at length before this session. Yeah, I think that is a problem, and we need to train our clergy and other people to teach and preach and to address the ecological crisis in their sermons. I think there's, at least my own church, there's an apprehension. People realize we need to do it, but it's difficult to do it. But in answer to your question, I think we should not forget the interfaith statement that was mentioned here. We've come together from all sorts of religious traditions, making this very powerful interfaith statement. You should read it if you haven't. And for instance, we call to make ecocide a crime, for ecocide law. We are waiting for the corporations, for the political parties, for the financial sector to come together and do the same. We have already done that. It's there. So I think we are coming together, but there's still much more to be done, of course.
Okay. So how will this change happen? And I think I will go to Karena now. What do you think? What are your perspective on that?
Absolutely. I believe that we must mobilize and activate those who are already feeling the consciousness to want to make this change, but are paralyzed either by, in my country, a feeling of not wanting to be political in some cases. They feel this is a controversial political issue that they don't want to touch. In this case, we need to look at the most powerful times when faith communities have led, such as in abolition of slavery, such as, of course, the anti-apartheid movement. There are many examples where something that was seen as a political issue was taken out of that construct by virtue of the fact that it was deeply grounded in a commonly shared moral sensibility. And so what we're facing now is that a lot of the behaviors and activities that drive ecological destruction, whether it's climate, biodiversity loss, pollution, so on, are perfectly legal. And they're even socially encouraged. And so the role that faith communities must play in this time is countercultural. And we have to draw on that deep legacy of having done that in important movements of other kinds. And I think that it happens by mobilizing and activating those who are already there but aren't using the infrastructure and the facilities and traditions that are there available. We can do that through trainings. We can do that through convenings and mobilizations, through inspiring each other. But we also need to reach out to those who are not necessarily belonging to that conventional religious traditions, but have a spiritual dimension to their lives, are seeking greater meaning and purpose. That is all human beings. And we've seeded this a bit so that we have a market-based secular society that is commodified, sees everyone as consumers, and we need to be able to step in and reach out to those people beyond just the conventional faith community belonging and offer a better vision. And I believe that this will happen now. I feel the energy and inspiration from those gathered.
Thank you, Karena. Shaheen, when I spoke to you before, you talked about everything coming down to greed, that was the problem. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so from my perspective, the concept of greed is very much an economic driver to where we sit on climate change. But that, the question around that, let's go back to the IPCC report, is what will it cost and what will it bring and what will it take to fulfill this ambition? The IPCC report speaks of a dire warning about the consequences of inaction. And as Karena spoke about, this is what you can do to be active. but what are the consequences of inaction? You know, the key finding in that report underlines the absolute urgency for climate action, focusing particularly on equity and justice. It also emphasizes on something really important, which is about human vulnerability that is associated with the global climate change. You know, climate change itself poses a contentious challenge to the international community for a number of reasons. First, although there's been much progress and we have some kind of public acceptance to it, particularly over the last couple of decades, it's still accepted as one of the least important things. And in some cases, it's sometimes a kind of a legitimate issue. And second thing is, you know, the rapid climate change, what we see in the parts of the world that I work in, are a consequence of human behavior for which few actually want to take responsibility. And climate change is fraught with issues of inequality. And I know many of you know that I speak on this issue a lot. Not only do nations who contribute to climate change in varying degrees, but its consequences are felt disproportionately as well, with the developing nations of the tropic and the subtropic regions impacted the most. So significantly, what you're seeing is that nations that contribute most to the greenhouse gases, for example, are the best, are the ones that have the ability to adapt to the effects of climate change. And these nations are also less likely to view climate change as a major threat. You know, climate change poses a challenge to the international community because its consequences are so far-reaching that the effects of climate change will impact every nation and will be felt across all domains of life. You know, I talk about this and I speak about ecological debt, which is at the heart of climate change. Unpaid debt can be added to that. If you take more than your fair share from a faith perspective, even as an individual, if you take more than your fair share of finite natural resources, you run ecological debt. Some countries run such a huge surplus of greenhouse gases, relying on others to run a deficit that mops up their pollution. Yet the damage will not fall on the polluters. The richer nations are in fact in debt to the poor, who live well below their means in terms of the carbon footprint. So the question is, what debt eventually will be repaid? You know, when we speak about the question of greed, it is that our economic situation is at its core in its pursuit for capital accumulation and profit, and that some people can be sacrificed, my dear friends, particularly from the global south. And out of that arises, you know, the historical context of the reflection of the injustices of our time. And it's a product of injustice, and it perpetuates the very injustice that lies behind it. That of what we haven't spoken about is around racial injustice and the exploitation of the global south.
Andreas?
Speaking towards the topic of greed, I think greed is really the fruit. I agree with what you said. And I think greed is really the fruit of the current paradigm of economic growth. And that's why I mean why we bring to the table is the need for new stories. You know, away from materialism, from excessive individualism, and from this really tiring consumerism that's just consuming us and the earth. And so yeah, that's what we need, the new stories. And we, faith-based organizations and people of faith, can bring to the table new ideas, new visions, new paradigms.
Yeah, and I believe that religion is the only force in the world that can stand up to the juggernaut of consumerism. There's no other force in the world that can do that. And therefore, and religion is the only force in the world that can encourage us to live our highest selves. According to the book of the Zohar, the Kabbalistic, mystical book, the human being has many levels of soul. And we can, 25 levels even. Living at the lowest level of soul awareness, we are drawn to a big cheeseburger, you know, all the things that are advertised, and that is the root of the ecological crisis, is our overconsumption. But the spiritual challenge that the ecological crisis is messaging to us is that we need to raise our level of soul awareness. And because when we raise our level of soul awareness, those things that are not healthy for our bodies or our families or our communities or our planet are going to suddenly become unappealing. You know, when a person comes from a religious service and feels a sense of spiritual connection, they don't necessarily want to go and, you know, binge on ice cream or fast food. They realize, wow, I'm feeling whole, I'm feeling complete, I'm feeling connected to God and to other people and creatures, and therefore I want to treat them with respect.
Yes, thank you. So what is the way forward in this? We said that this seminar will talk about the way forward. What do you think, Andreas? I will give the, yeah.
Well, I think like Festus laid it out, we need to be at the table and not be packed up with the NGOs, like you said. I think that's one answer. But if we're looking at ourselves, there's a whole lot of other answers to your question.
Yeah, because we said that it was easy to sign this statement, but now the hard works begin, right? Is it just about reusing, recycling, and so on, and putting solar panels? Or we're talking about a change in behavior, right? So how do we achieve this change? What do you think, Shaheen?
So I think, I mean, for us as people of faith, particularly within the Islamic faith tradition, with the essence of understanding this perspective comes the morality, and with the morality comes the moral responsibility. So the debate then becomes a moral imperative for us around wisdom, around temperance, and around courage, which are good when they serve virtuous ends. But I think one of the other things is that when we look at that outward quality of virtue, what does that mean? So in our faith tradition, we have the aspect of disruptive justice, distributive justice in Islam, which is the norms of a resource allocation and the perception of fairness by recipients of, justice. And in answer to your question, I think coming from something that is humanistic concern, there are three principles, and one is adl, which is the concept of justice. One is insaf, the concept of equity, fair play, and impartiality. And the third one is ihsan. It's a matter of taking one's inner faith and showing it in both deed and action. So we in the ihsan space as a community have a sense of social responsibility born out from the religious convictions towards climate action. So I think in terms of signing, a statement, the responsibility then comes back to us because we have the religious conviction to be able to tackle climate action. Now, on an FBO level, I would say there'll be monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and impact on all the other kind of stuff that we need. But I think the moral responsibility and the social responsibility falls on each individual and each individual community.
Yesterday there was a big youth assembly here in Stockholm. And we have all heard and seen the desperation and anxiety from young people. We've heard, for example, Greta Thunberg pointing at the leaders of the world and saying, how dare you not take action? And we won't forgive you if you don't, if you betray us. So how do we give hope? And you at faith-based, how do we give hope to the future generations? We bring them in, of course, so they also are at the table, so that their voices and perspective are heard. But how do we take action? And I want to go to you, Karena, on this question.
Thank you. Well, this is a deeply challenging time and also a time of, as they say, signs and wonders, opening up possibilities that were never there before. We, in faith communities, in some ways, we must be very honest and look at the ways in which we're all wrapped up in the power structure as it is, in the problems as they are. And strive for integrity and model integrity in looking at things in terms of ecological sensibilities. Where does our power come from? Where does our food come from? Where does our waste go? How are we in relationship with the non-human species that we share the place with? Where are there injustices of pollution and so on? We must do that. But also let's recognize the goodness that is already there within spaces. Many faith communities have created spaces that are spaces of welcome, of fellowship, of contemplation, of going deepward and healing and connection to higher powers, of looking at ways of conceiving of life beyond those worldly measures of materialism that are so often being foisted on us as the only way to think about things. And so there's so much to give. To those who are leading faith communities now, thank you for cultivating and protecting those spaces. Now put them to use in this time towards that ecological work. And we have so much to learn across faith traditions. I believe in respecting those that keep their traditions, but also we can see, for example, from indigenous, from East Asian traditions, this sense of harmony and balance, this sense of belonging that might be a little bit of a different way of talking about things than those of us that have grown up as I have in Abrahamic faith traditions. And so I would just close by saying the words of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher who passed this past year, that we are here to awaken to the illusion of our separateness. I often think about that in this time. That is what the climate crisis actually can teach us, and it's also a wonderful opportunity to make for a better life in many ways.
Thank you, Karina. I will give you 1 minute each to comment on this. Andreas, starting with you.
Well, the question was, how can we give hope to young people? Well, I think one path forward is, like Karina mentioned earlier, to actually be the counter culture, not be so mainstream, to dare as a church, for instance, to be more counterculture, to be more critical of the mainstream society, and etc. And then I think what we also have in our faith traditions is our capacity to give rituals. Like last night we had a magnificent service, memorial service for extinct species, and we gave ritual space for our grief, for our devastation at what's going on. We walked around, looked at pictures of extinct species, and people cried. I cried. And that from our tears, we can gather new hope. So I think giving ritual, ceremonial expression to grief, for instance, or anger is a powerful way of gathering hope.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Despair is a spiritual challenge for a sustainable world. And Rabbi Nachman of Breslov said, never give up hope. Some people think there's no such thing as climate change, but other people think that we're so far off the cliff that there's nothing we can do. But Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said that hope is a religious virtue. It's a belief that we can be better than ourselves, that we can live a higher life, and we can know that we are walking with God. God is behind us. God wants a sustainable planet, as it says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, and God placed the human being in the Garden of Eden to serve it and conserve it. And so the hope is that no matter how bad the science seems, no matter bad how the fires and the droughts and the floods seem, if we make the spiritual change toward a more spiritually elevated and ecological society, that God will reward us with a new earth and a sustainable planet.
Thank you. Shaheen, you'll have the last word then.
Thank you. I mean, I was with the young people last year in COP26, and we walked tirelessly to call for change. And we can collectively do that together. And one of the things I want to say is that whilst we're all in disparate places in USA, in London, or in Sweden, I think the question is that can we possibly see another world that is possible within the both social and environmental justice that we see placed in front of us in the changing context? And in answer to your question, there are profound implications for future generations. And there are profound implications for marginalized communities who are facing the consequence of climate change. And it is clear that the time to act is now. And we have many within our scriptural spaces around hope. And I take on what Jonathan has just said before us. You know, it is that kind of the narrative around hope within our faith traditions that will push us forward. But it's also understanding that actually the future generations, if they could understand that within the climate change narrative and within our religious perspective, the two are aligned and the two are not separated. And that could be placed at the forefront of for future generations to see the consequences of how we all tackle climate change together.
So that brings us to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your expertise, your experiences with us. Let's give them an applause. And then finally, I will give the floor to Charlotta Norby, Secretary General at SMC-faith in Development, to give some closing remarks to us all.
Thank you, Esther. Yes, good evening, everybody. I think we're soon closing down after a long, interesting day here at the conference. So my name is Charlotta Norby. I'm the Secretary General of SMC-faith in Development. On behalf of my organization, I would like to thank the hosts of this conference, Sweden and Kenya, along with UNEP, for the possibility to arrange this important dialogue here tonight. And I would especially like to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Cabinet Secretary for Ministry of Environment and Forestry in Kenya, Mr. Kariako Tobiko. Honorable Secretary, would you join me here on stage just to give some final comments? So please, to give some final comments before I continue.
Thank you so very much, Secretary General. Good evening, all. I've been here for a couple of, I think, 1 hour, and I must say this, I have become spiritually literate and religiously literate. It is an amazing discussion on a matter so important. And I think there is need for such engagement between the faith-led organization and policymakers. It is so absolutely important. We don't have monopoly of knowledge at all. And we focus ourselves on institutions, architecture, design. We focus on laws. We focus on policies. We focus on enforcement, and so on and so forth. But all that are important, but cannot achieve much without what I've heard here today. We must speak to the hearts. We must speak to the mind and the soul and the spirit of our people. Without that, we cannot. Actually, there's no shortage of all those that I have mentioned. So we must work together. And we've been working together with faith-led organizations in Kenya. I remember 2017 when we banned plastics, and my colleague Nema here. When we banned plastic, there was a huge uproar between from private sector and industry and so on, even the local people, the incited, and politicians. It was the religious segment, the spiritual leaders who came up and said what government did was the right thing. So we must work together in that. Faith organizations have the legitimacy. They have the networks. And this really need to be maximized. Absolutely maximized. And don't fear encroaching on politics, because it's not politics. This is a matter of life and death. We know where we are now. And I just, Karina said this, the illusion of separateness. I think there is this assumption that we human beings are separate from and distinct from nature. We are not. It's a fallacy. We are nature. We are part of nature. Nature is us. So if we don't take care of environment, we don't take care of nature, we face extinction. We have mobilized a faith-led organization in Kenya. We have entered into memoranda of understanding and so on and so forth. We're doing massive tree planting, cleanups of the environment and so on and so forth. And you can just imagine the potential there. But as you speak about these big things, and you must, also look at the small little things that your congregations, you can just imagine the numbers you have of your followers, those who come every worship day to worship. If each one of them were told that they can actually hugely impact positively by taking some little steps in terms of reducing their carbon footprints, I think this is so. So I'm extremely honored to be here today, and I won't tell you how I came about knowing this event. It's a secret, but thank you very much, and let's keep up that discussion. So I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Cabinet Secretary, for those inspiring words. So I would like to thank UNEP Faith for Earth and our member organizations PMU and LM International for organizing this event together with SMC-faith in Development. Especially thank you to Esther for moderating this session. And of course, most of all, I would like to extend a warm thank you to the brilliant panelists and speakers tonight. They were brought together here from many parts of the world and with many different faith backgrounds, representing so many different voices and sharing knowledge and experience. From the perspective of my faith, I see the Sustainable Development Goals as an extension of the good news that faith is bringing to the world, an expression of how we would like the world to be. And faith-based organizations, as we've talked about tonight, are firmly rooted on grassroots level in almost every town, village, and settlement in the world. And I wish and pray that faith-based organizations can give the voice to the people that we sometimes refer to as marginalized or coming from the margins, and the people that we should see at the center of our common concern. And therefore, I hope that we will be able to send a powerful message to the conference that religious actors carry a crucial role in facing our common challenges, and that religious literacy is needed to bring the best results when different stakeholders shall work together. And coming from this session tonight, we have formulated 3 takeaways that will feed into the general report. We don't know exactly how yet, but we've sent them to the report, the people who write the report, and it will feed into their work. And I would like to read them out to you, just as a final takeaway from this session. So there are 3 takeaways. The first one is that we demand a new development paradigm where the most vulnerable are at the core of any discussion of sustainable development, so that their voices are heard and their perspectives are prioritized. The second one is religious literacy, meaning the ability to understand the role of religion, is crucial for sustainable development in any society. We invite decision and policy makers, as well as all involved in development, to explore and increase the religious literacy. And then the final one is faith actors are a vital part of any society, have already been contributing to sustainable development with holistic solutions, and are committed to mobilize to those solutions. We expect, together with the youth faith actors, to be part of dialogues and to be given a meaningful seat at the table. So we have again, thank you all.
Yes. Thank you so much also to you in the audience for spending this time with us, for your interest and for your attention. If you have any questions for us as organizers, we will be standing here so you can come forward. I think that we have to leave the room pretty soon, but we could move out with you if you want to ask us something. Thank you very much.